Verses 12 to 14. Here is the prayer of Joshua that the sun might stand still. I call it his prayer, because it is said, v12, he spoke to the Lord, as Elijah, though we read, 1 Key 17:1, only of his prophesying of the drought, yet is said, James 5:17, to pray for it. An instance of Joshua's unwearied activity in the service of God and Israel, that though he had marched all night and fought all day, and, one might expect, would be inclined to repose himself and get a little sleep, and give his army some time to rest, that, like the hireling, he would earnestly desire the shadow, and bid the night welcome, when he had done such a good day's work. Yet, instead of this, he wishes for nothing so much as the prolonging of the day. Note, those that wait on the Lord and work for him shall renew their strength, shall run and not be weary, shall walk and not faint. An instance of his great faith in the almighty power of God, as above the power of nature, and able to control and alter the usual course of it. No doubt Joshua had an extraordinary impulse or impression upon his spirit, which he knew to be of divine origin, prompting him to desire that this miracle might be wrought upon this occasion, else it would have been presumption in him to desire or expect. The prayer would not have been granted by the divine power, if it had not been dictated by the divine grace. God wrought this faith in him, and then said, according to thy faith, and thy prayer of faith, be it unto thee. It cannot be imagined, however, that such a thing as this should have entered into his mind if God had not put it there. A man would have had 1,000 projects in his head for the completing of the victory before he would have thought of desiring the sun to stand still, but even in the Old Testament saints the Spirit made intercession according to the will of God. What God will give he inclines the hearts of his praying people to ask, and for what he will do he will be inquired of. Now, first, it looked great for Joshua to say, Sun, stand thou still. His ancestor Joseph had indeed dreamed that the sun and moon did homage to him, but who would have thought that, after it had been fulfilled in the figure, it should be again fulfilled in the letter to one of his posterity? The prayer is thus expressed with authority, because it was not an ordinary prayer, such as is directed and supported only by God's common providence or promise, but the prayer of a prophet at this time divinely inspired for this purpose, and yet it intimates to us the prevalency of prayer in general, so far as it is regulated by the Word of God, and may remind us of that honor put upon prayer. Isa 45:11, concerning the work of my hands command you me. He bids the sun stand still upon Gibeon, the place of action and the seat of war, intimating that what he designed in this request was the advantage of Israel against their enemies. It is probable that the sun was now declining, and that he did not call for the lengthening out of the day until he observed it hastening towards it. He does likewise, in the name of the King of Kings, arrest the moon, perhaps because it was requisite for the preserving of the harmony and good order of the spheres that the course of the rest of the heavenly bodies should be stayed likewise. Otherwise, while the sun shone, he needed not the moon, and here he mentions the valley of Ajalon, which was near to Gibeon, because there he was at that time. Secondly, it was bold indeed to say so before Israel, and argues a very strong assurance of faith. If the event had not answered the demand, nothing could have been a greater slur upon him. The Israelites would have concluded he was certainly going mad, or he would never have talked so extravagantly. But he knew very well God would own and answer a petition which he himself directed to be drawn up and presented, and therefore was not afraid to say before all Israel, calling them to observe this work of wonder, Sun, stand thou still, for he was confident in him whom he had trusted. He believed the almighty power of God, else he could not have expected that the sun, going on in its strength, driving in a full career, and rejoicing as a strong man to run a race, should be stopped in an instant. He believed the sovereignty of God in the kingdom of nature, else he could not have expected that the established law and course of nature should be changed and interrupted, the ordinances of heaven, and the constant usage according to these ordinances, broken in upon. And he believed God's particular favor to Israel above all people under the sun, else he could not have expected that, to favor them upon an emergency with a double day, he should, which must follow of course, amaze and terrify so great a part of the terrestrial globe with a double night at the same time. It is true, he causeth the sun to shine upon the just and the unjust, but for this once the unjust shall wait for it beyond the usual time, while, in favor to righteous Israel, it stands still. The wonderful answer to this prayer. No sooner said than done. v13 The sun stood still, and the moon stayed. Notwithstanding the vast distance between the earth and the sun, at the word of Joshua the sun stopped immediately, for the same God that rules in heaven above rules at the same time on this earth, and, when he pleases, even the heavens shall hear the earth, as here. Concerning this great miracle it is here said, that it continued a whole day, that is, the sun continued as long again above the horizon as otherwise it would have done. It is commonly supposed to have been about the middle of summer that this happened, when, in that country, it was about 14 hours between sun and sun, so that this day was about 28 hours long, yet, if we suppose it to have been at that time of the year when the days are at the shortest, it will be the more probable that Joshua should desire and pray for the prolonging of the day. That hereby the people had full time to avenge themselves of their enemies, and to give them a total defeat. We often read in history of battles which the night put an end to, the shadows of which favored the retreat of the conquered. To prevent this advantage to the enemy in their flight, the day was doubled, that the hand of Israel might find out all their enemies, but the eye and hand of God can find them out without the help of the sun's light, for to him the night shineth as the day. Note, sometimes God completes a great salvation in a little time, and makes but one day's work of it. Perhaps this miracle is alluded to Zech 14:6, 7, where the day of God's fighting against the nations is said to be one day, and that at evening time it shall be light, as here. That there was never any day like it, before or since, in which God put such an honor upon faith and prayer, and upon Israel's cause, never did he so wonderfully comply with the request of a man, nor so wonderfully fight for his people. This is said to be written in the book of Jasher, a collection of state poems, in which the poem made upon this occasion was preserved among the rest, probably the same with that book of the Wars of the Lord, number 21:14, which afterwards was continued and carried on by one Jasher. Those words, Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou moon in the valley of Ajalon, sounding metrical, are supposed to be taken from the narrative of this event as it was found in the book of Jasher. Not that the divine testimony of the book of Joshua needed confirmation from the book of Jasher, a human composition, but to those who had that book in their hands it would be of use to compare this history with it, which warrants the appeals the learned make to profane history for corroborating the proofs of the truth of sacred history. But surely this stupendous miracle of the standing still of the sun was intended for something more than merely to give Israel so much the more time to find out and kill their enemies, which, without this, might have been done the next day. First, God would hereby magnify Joshua, ch 3:7, as a particular favorite, and one whom he did delight to honor, being a type of him who has all power both in heaven and in earth and whom the winds and the seas obey. Secondly, he would hereby notify to all the world what he was doing for his people Israel here in Canaan. The sun, the eye of the world, must be fixed for some hours upon Gibeon and the valley of Ajalon, as if to contemplate the great works of God there for Israel, and so to engage the children of men to look that way, and to inquire of this wonder done in the land. Proclamation was hereby made to all the neighboring nations. Come, behold the works of the Lord, PS 46:8, and say, what nation is there so great as Israel is, who has God so nigh unto them? One would have supposed that this would bring such real ambassadors as the Gibeonites pretended to be from a very far country, to court the friendship of Israel because of the name of the Lord their God. Thirdly, he would hereby convince and confound those idolaters that worshipped the sun and moon and gave divine honors to them, by demonstrating that they were subject to the command of the God of Israel, and that, as high as they were, he was above them, and thus he would fortify his people against temptations to this idolatry, which he foresaw they would be addicted to, do 4:19, and which, notwithstanding this, they afterwards corrupted themselves with. Fourthly, this miracle signified, it is the learned Bishop Pearson's notion, that in the latter days, when the light of the world was tending towards a light of darkness, the Son of Righteousness, even our Joshua, should arise, Mal 4:2, give check to the approaching night, and be the true light. To which let me add that when Christ conquered our spiritual enemies upon the cross, the miracle wrought on the sun was the reverse of this. It was then darkened as if it had gone down at noon, for Christ needed not the light of the sun to carry on his victories, he then made darkness his pavilion. And, lastly, the arresting of the sun and moon in this day of battle prefigured the turning of the sun into darkness, and the moon into blood, in the last great and terrible day of the Lord.